I'm going to kick us off. What I'm going to do here is introduce our panel one-on-one and ask them a question to get that conversation going and moving. And then I will turn it over to the audience to ask any questions that you have, which you can do in the Q&A panel. And then we'll wrap the day. So the first person I'm going to introduce is Nicky Wille. Nicky is a client partner here at Stoneridge Software, and she's got a lot of great experience helping our Dynamics GP customers navigate when and how to begin planning for the cloud. So she works with our clients. She talks to them about where are you at in this process? How can I help you get the right information to make sure that you're making the best decisions? If you're unsure about timing, if she helps identify those early signals that indicate it's time to start planning. She focuses on reducing risk, assessments, preparation, sequencing, all the things to get you where you need to go. So with that, Nicky, welcome to the panel. And I would like to ask you, when should we start? So if a client's thinking about when should we start, how do we reduce risk of that move from GP to VC? How should they think about that?
Thank you, Maggie. And that's a great question. It's one that certainly comes up quite a lot. I know it came up a little bit in my roundtable session with some of our users there. So really, these two things are related. The earlier you start to plan for a migration, the less risky it essentially becomes. So I want to emphasize here that starting doesn't necessarily mean migrating tomorrow. It's starting that process of looking at earlier than you need to, looking at your various elements of your environment and your own nuances for your timelines and starting to plan around that a little bit. So I think the advantages of starting early is that it gives you choice. You're not rushing, you're not delaying. You have that opportunity to really plan ahead based on your own timelines and busy seasons and year ends and all of that good stuff. So yeah, I think reducing risk is really about starting early. And it also is just starting to think about maybe some of that prep work that you can do in the meantime. So things like maybe looking at cleaning what kind of data you might want to clean up, or planning for your next move when it comes to something like payroll or your HR tools or whatever that may be. Just starting to look at what options are out there so that when the time comes, you're not rushing and you've already started to see what's available to you. So I think that is one of the great advantages of our GP migration assessment, Maggie, because it's like a free, no pressure way for our clients to start to think about these things with an expert and try to understand where this could fit within their budget and their timelines, truly in advance of when they may actually want to move.
Awesome. Thanks, Nicky. It reminds me of that old adage, failing to plan is planning to fail. So the earlier you can start planning, the better. So thank you. All right. And then we've got Deb Schaffer on our panel. Some of you may know Deb. Deb is a senior solution architect and a team manager here at Stoneridge. She's got deep hands-on experience helping our Dynamics GP customers execute that transition to the cloud. She brings a lot of practical perspective grounded in implementation and kind of what happens in real life. Deb has a lot of history and experience with GP as well, and now does a lot of BC work. So she helps guide our organizations through those migrations, from everything to the functional aspect, like what are the differences functionally, how can I think about ISVs, what are some of the payroll considerations I need to think about, and then making sure all of those processes and data and everything goes with it. So I'm really excited to have Deb on the panel as well. Welcome, Deb. So the question I have for you, Deb, is how does the move actually work in practice once you decide to go?
Thank you, Maggie. And that is a very good question as well. And I know it's one that seems like there's a lot of things to go through, but at the point that you've signed your statement of work and you are ready to move forward with the process, then we will have a kickoff call where you will get to meet the team that you're going to be working with. So that include our project manager and our functional consultants and potentially a solution architect, depending on the complexity of your business, but always available to help and assist with questions. Once that happens, then we start looking and going into our joint visioning sessions. And that is where, just as it's called, joint visioning. So that's where we're learning to understand your business and what your specific business requirements are. From that, we will then provide you also data templates to pull your data out of your GP solution, whether that's via SmartList or SQL servers. And we can help you with that as well. We have a number of implementation team members and support members that have GP in their backgrounds as well. So we have that cross knowledge of both of those solutions. Once we finish that, then we go into our joint process design. And this is really, again, where your team is going to be hands-on in BC and learning to understand what the BC processes are. So what looks different? What are the requirements for field data? What all do you need to enter in so that you're getting the right data out of the system when you're reporting? At the end of that joint process design session, then we're going to be going into our end-to-end. And so we're doing full end-to-end processes. So from purchase invoice to paying your vendor to reconciling your bank statements. At the end of that, we move into conference room pilot, where we're getting the rest of your team if you haven't had everybody involved in the solution. So again, that really depends on how large is the team that you're working with. We do the conference room pilot, which gives you testing scenarios specifically to follow, end-to-end process testing, making sure that everything is going to function the way that you need to have it function, so that we can then move into user acceptance testing. And this is the last major step before we're ready to go live. And that user acceptance testing is really for your team to get into the system, final sign off that everything is functioning. If there's integrations in play, we've got those all working. Everything is flowing as you expect it to. And then we have our go, no go meeting. And with a go, that means we're going to go live, and your team is going to participate in the cutover process. So doing a final load of data from your system, making sure that everything's reconciling from subledgers to ledgers. So making sure that your open AR matches your accounts receivable in the GL. Same thing with payables. We're going to match your AP trade in the GL, and you're going to go live. The implementation team is going to stay with you through the hypercare period, making sure that everything is functioning, your users are doing their day-to-day processes, everything is working the way you expect. And then we will either transition to support, and you will be empowered to continue on in Business Central. Or if you have some phase 2 activities you'd like to do, we can roll into that.
Awesome.
About as fast as I can make it, Maggie.
Yeah, no, I think you did a great job, because you can tell it's a very kind of systematic approach, and it builds in process and technology and the people element that's so important to get your users accustomed to that new system before we just turn it on and go live. They'll be involved as much as they can be and as much as you want them to be to make sure that they're ready during that go live. That's a huge part of the success. So thanks for answering that. And I am going to introduce the last member of our panel, Scott Frappier. Scott is you just heard from Scott if you were on the session earlier. He's our chief software architect here at Microsoft. He's got a lot of experience and expertise, but he thinks about it all together. So how do we transition these on-premise systems to modern cloud-based architecture, which includes not just the wonderful product of Microsoft Business Central, but Azure, Copilot, different things that you can be doing with M365. He knows and has expertise across all of that and many other things to help scale and get you where you need to go. So Scott, my question for you is, how does the technology foundation they just described, how does that help enable the cloud and AI?
Yeah, it's a great question, Maggie. Really appreciate being able to be on here. And I like to say jack of all trades, master of some, right? So there's a lot to know when it comes to cloud enablement, and having a partner involved is really critical. And maybe what I can do is just back up and just break it out a little bit more too on why it's important to go through this transition and why the market moved to it. Because quite candidly, it's not just about billing. Like we always there's a lot of people that think in that fashion, but there's also about technological enablement as well that you just can't do for a lot of smaller organizations, for example, without having larger organizations offsetting some of that cost from a business perspective. And that's great for a lot of customers. It starts to equalize that a little bit more as well. But when we think about the adoption and the trend change that we saw, which started probably in earnest about 12, almost 13 years ago, where we started to see more of this shift basically from on-prem to cloud. And I'll be the first to say when it first came out, because it was NetSuite that was really pushing it and others, I was like, no way, this is not a good thing. Like customers don't want to, they want to go grab basically the server and touch it and make sure that they've got all their data right there. And I remember that being one of the biggest complaints, Maggie, that we had as we navigated through that, is that customers really wanted to have that interaction with their data because they didn't know of the capabilities that they could get, for example, by moving to a more modern technological platform like the cloud. And what do I mean by that? Most of the problems that we saw, for example, with customers has to deal with maintenance around, for example, their servers. It comes about patching. It comes around having cybersecurity and having all these different tools that you had to buy to secure your infrastructure because you didn't want somebody logging in to basically take over your environment or plant ransomware in. And quite candidly, most customers that we interact with, the ones that get into the bad position with this are the ones that are not cloud enabled. And I'm not saying that to spread fear, uncertainty, or doubt or the FUD perspective, but the reality is that it's easier to infiltrate a that has no security behind it that is on your local on-prem data than it is to go into the cloud and basically navigate through all the different security structures that Microsoft has, for example. So I think that was really the pushback that we experienced during the cloud enablement time, which was this fear around your data and security. And quite candidly, we've gotten past that. We've got governance, for example, that's in place that ensures that Microsoft's cloud is not only secure when we think about a computer access perspective, but also for people that are next to the server, so to speak. We've got the ability now to scale, for example, our systems to basically consume additional resources and needs that then really align then with your business trends, where maybe you're selling more during the Christmas time period, but you don't need all that hardware or that capacity before, so you can actually have a better cost impact for you. And I think that technology platform, Maggie, from what you're saying, is one of those slices. I always look at it through the lens of people, process, and technology. I've been burned in the past when I led with just technology as a leader, because then what happens is you would spin the globe and target business analytics as an example. And when a customer went to use it, it wasn't the same experience. So I think that technology component is really critical to look at it through a realistic lens of moving forward here. We're going to need more automation. Moving forward here, we have other competitors that are going to use AI, for example, to cut down on the cost of what it takes to enter a transaction, which means they're going to be more profitable. We're going to have, for example, new tools that are introduced that are inefficient at first, that become efficient over time from a scale perspective as well. So when we look at cloud enablement for a company, it's kind of, do you want a vehicle or not? Do you want to be able to drive a vehicle to get to the destination you need to get to, which is going to be operational efficiency, is going to be remote access, is going to be reporting and visibility? These are all components that were harder to do with on-prem and even probably less secure. And as we start looking at that modern technology outlook, in order for you to keep up basically with what everyone else is doing, and I'm not saying what everyone else is doing is always right, that's not what I'm saying, but I will say that the tried and true data now behind the ROI is pretty factual when it comes to what a technology platform looks like in the cloud or with AI for that matter as well. So I guess, Maggie, just to get really to the core here, the technology exists the way it does right now because it does satisfy a lot of those business operational needs that go beyond just the technology platform. And it's really hard to find one company that supports all the different layers of technology that's needed to really support your business. And once again, while you may be here for GP to BC, you're also probably curious on, how do I get Outlook hooked up to it? How do I get SharePoint to look at my data? How do I get my training to be more efficient for my team members by using Copilot? All those needs are tackled by the Microsoft ecosystem, which is once again a rare thing to see. And I think it's truly a cost benefit for a lot of organizations in the long term that goes just beyond technology as well. So hopefully that makes sense. It's a long-winded answer, Maggie, but I think it's the truth that I've seen as we've navigated this.
Yeah, that was great perspective. I always picture hundreds of people securing the infrastructure up in the cloud. You've now got this team of security experts constantly tweaking and making sure that you're secure. That's how, I don't know if that's how it happens. They've never let me look into the cloud, but that's how I picture some of it. So thank you, Scott. We do have a couple of questions in the chat. Just a reminder for the attendees, you can put your questions either in the chat or there is a Q&A. But the first question we have is from John Gast. Thank you, John. He is asking panel, we are operating our Microsoft Dynamics GP with Google email. What are your thoughts on sticking with a Google environment for the security and functionality? Is M365 essential or the accounting? Is it essential or the accounting part of our organization?
I can answer for the BC side of things for sure. We have a number of clients that are Google shops, with the exception of Business Central, and Microsoft has made it very possible for you to continue to use your Google Mail and Google functionality while still using Business Central. So you're still able to email invoices, you can send quotes and reports, and it's really just about how you set up Business Central to make sure that you're tied into your Google applications. And
Yeah,
Scott, I don't know if you have anything.
Yeah, I was going to say, Deb, right? So, yeah, I agree entirely with what Deb said. You know, I'm going to say it bluntly because I think it's always good to not beat around the bush. If you think about what they do from a development perspective at Microsoft, the best impact or the biggest impact you're going to have in your organization is to use the tools that talk to each other natively. The example of that is our CRM application, Dynamics 365 Sales. There's a native integration back to Business Central to basically bring in your accounts as customers or vendors, or synchronize those invoices without you having to have a middleware component for it. And there's a lot of benefit to that, because then, like, when you think about software as a culture, like, I use Google for all my personal stuff. I use Gemini for a lot of the stuff that I interact with as well, on top of Copilot and even ChatGPT. And I will say that the moment that there's issues, it's really hard to get them fixed. And that's sometimes where the trap is with consulting, because sometimes what happens is you find out that while it may support some of the features inside of the ecosystem, like in BC, sending the invoices and things of that nature that Deb mentioned, it may not work, for example, with the new agents. So agents, for example, have mailboxes that they have to monitor. And those mailboxes, a lot of the technology that drives that is Exchange, and how we then trigger or inform an agent about a new email that came, for example. So I think, to Deb's point, you can absolutely do it. And I think it's a very valid approach. And I think for some of us, cost is a much bigger factor that we have to contemplate compared to maybe the price point or value is not there in the Microsoft ecosystem for it. But I will say, just really candidly, it's kind of like first party parts when you go through Ford or Chevy, OEM, and the quality level of them and the testing and all that stuff that happens behind it. The same concept exists in software. If you're able to support more of the Microsoft technologies on your platform, you're going to have less issues, period. That is no doubt. Are you going to have issues? You might have some issues, right? But you're going to have less issues that you're going to have to deal with on it, and more documented examples and more of one company basically to move that forward. But at the same point, once again, having the microservices architecture that we have, we can snap in, for example, with Gmail and with those other components too. So once again, it's a balance, and I think you'd want to quantify just a little bit more, like, what are the areas where we see that Google has more value? So move it into a business evaluation instead of a technology evaluation, and see what can Microsoft tackle that Google does or doesn't do, or why are we using Google? Is it cheaper? And whatever that answer is, I think that we can then give you a more realistic perspective as to really what path you should go, which might be, once again, like David said, continuing to use Gmail, because it is a very valid platform and it is supported then by the Business Central application as well.
Great. Thank you. And we've got another one in the chat from Paul. Once we are using BC in the cloud, will using a VPN to the BC server be an option or maybe required?
That's all you, Deb.
Okay, so that's going to be it depends, because if you're using BC in the cloud, you would not need to use a VPN for that. There can be some confusion about BC in the cloud versus BC on-prem. If you are BC on-prem, you need to use your VPN. So if you're truly in the cloud, no. Just to make sure what your environment really looks like.
That's one of the benefits of the cloud, right?
It absolutely is.
All right. Oh, hold on. I think we got one in the Q&A. Yes, we do. All right, I like this one. What is usually the most challenging part of a GP to cloud move? Is it the technology, the data, or the people?
I can kick us off with this one, Maggie, at least.
Yeah.
And I think obviously the answer is it depends on you and your organization. It certainly varies depending on the organization. But just going off some of the discussions I had in our roundtable, I think a big concern really for a lot of organizations is the people side of things. So an interesting thing about this group is that everyone's using GP. And if you're using GP, chances are your organization has been on it for at least a decade or more. We hear that all the time. And so with that, it comes users that's their familiar tool. It's still working and they're wanting to change because that end of support data is coming along, which makes maybe that change feel a little scary and something new. So what I'd like to call out there is a little bit about what Deb spoke about in her answer there, which is really just that established. Eric, our CEO, mentioned the book that he wrote on Dynamics implementations. Deb's talking about this very systematic process. All of that has been designed to really support the technology implementation hand in hand with the people to make it a smoother ride. So that's things like using your own data in the system before we even think about going live to make sure that everyone's familiar with it. No one's waking up scared or losing sleep on the day before cutting over. So that's my perspective, but I'm curious to hear from the others or if there's other questions here.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you, Nikki, on that. It really depends on the business. It depends on the data. So how long have you had this data? Have you inherited this data and you've tried to make changes as you've moved forward with the business? So there are a lot of things to look at and consider as far as even just the data cleanup for that move and making sure that you understand what you really want to bring forward and what it'll take for you to be successful in your business.
Yeah, and I can add a tack on because this is a great question. The people is absolutely, Nikki, where I align with as well. Think about it like this, like most of you are running GP, you've ran it for like 15, 20 years possibly, right? Like you've got a lot of heritage there in terms of the cultural impact of software because GP, Doug Burgum, it was the Midwest product, right? So a lot of people in our region have used that because it was the small little software company that drove a lot of the business processes. And I think that the interesting thing, just to relate it to the tie-in of the people and technology, the technology basically accomplishes the same business goal and objective. I'm doing gen journals. I've got a balance sheet. I've got an income statement. I'm managing inventory, right? But the way you do it matters to users because they're so used to a specific process that when we start to look at Business Central having a slightly different process around it, that retraining that's needed is something that is very commonly faced with any organization. So from the people perspective with it, I would say as leaders, the best thing or best piece of advice I would give would be this is going to be different. It's a different software solution. It's a different culture that was behind it, that designed it. So there's going to be different words that are used to represent the same thing that we did inside of GP. But objectively continue to look at it as to what the business need is. What is the output of the data that's needed for it? And then I think the technology layer just becomes one of those pieces or components where we then align it to what those needs are. So once again, the people are going to be the area you're going to want to focus on more than anything, because I think the technology is a component with it, but people are really what drive these systems and who need the attention and the special touch to be successful in an implementation.
All right, thank you, panel. We've got time for probably one, maybe two more questions. So I'm going to ask one from the Q&A about ISVs. So it says, we rely heavily on GP ISVs or third parties. How do we figure out which ones we need to replace versus which ones we can retire?
So that's really going to depend on what the ISV is. So if we're looking at something like a Green Shades or an Integrity Data, there's options as far as using that in the future with Business Central versus moving to a different solution. So it's really about connecting with your client partners or your sales team to initially talk about what are the ISVs you're using now versus where your business is going in the future and how we want to address that. Our pre-sales architects all can assist with that as well. They're very familiar with all of those ISVs.
Okay, so what I heard you say, Deb, it's about assessing what you're using them for, assessing if that product is available on BC, like the modern version of that product for BC, and or maybe that functionality is built into BC and you no longer need that ISV. Or we heard from some of our great ISVs today too. There's lots of options, so
absolutely.
We can help. Awesome. Okay, last question. From Chris in the chat, if we want to integrate on-premise backend server services with BC in the cloud, how is that communication achieved securely? Is there a facility that corresponds to the function of integration manager in GP? So sounds to me like they want to integrate some of their on-prem servers up there in the cloud. How secure is that, Scott? And
we send everything in plain text. No, that is just absolutely a joke. Not even remotely close to the reality. Yeah, Chris, great question. So this is a common issue that we've tackled. In the cloud, when BC is running, the tools that we use to then accomplish the business goal are a little bit different than what you would use classically on-prem. So on-prem, just give a scenario with it. You use ODBC, right? Typically in some way, shape, or form to navigate or connect to a SQL server to get that data, and then you do something with it. That's probably oversimplified, but at the same point, it's fairly common as well. Inside of the Business Central world, we use what are called OData endpoints or web services or APIs, as we call them as well. And what happens is that data is encrypted between all communications that occur between Business Central and then whatever is going to be on-prem or whatever service that we're going to be accessing to tackle that. So that's one component with it, is that for a lot of those scenarios, what we do is we modernize whatever that integration requirement is. Maybe it is that you've got a SQL Server database that generates, for example, some data that needs to get into GP right now, but in the future inside of Business Central, well, what we do is we use the tooling to send that data via OData, which means it authenticates, it encrypts, and it makes sure that data is encrypted at rest, and we don't have to worry about really any of those clear plain text data scenarios that tackle it. The only other thing to note as well, Chris, is that there are other tools as well that the Microsoft platform uses to be able to then integrate distributed file services or file systems like DFS or on-prem file shares and things of that nature that then expose that in the cloud as well using tools that you install on the local computers that then send that data when requested to Business Central or even the other Microsoft services as well. So once again, there's kind of two different strategies that we'll tackle with it, but it's really common, as you can guess, to have some of that on-prem data that needs to get up into the cloud. You are going to have to kind of re-examine that a little bit because cloud concepts are a little different compared to on-prem concepts. But once again, there's tools and capabilities that are natively in BC and also on the Microsoft platform to really assist with that.
Great Scott, or Great Scott.
Right, one of the two.
Okay, I said that was the last question, but we got another one in Q&A that I want to hit really quick. What is the primary reason that we're suggesting GP cloud movement through BC? Is it because it's Microsoft to Microsoft? Are there other reasons? Are there other things to consider?
Yeah, I'll start maybe just high level.
Sure.
So there's a very big base of GP to BC customers that have done that move, which means there's a community behind it. So like there's absolutely, if you think about like Microsoft to Microsoft, because we like Microsoft Chad actually created a lot of the tooling at Microsoft that does, for example, conversions from GP to BC. It doesn't work in every situation, but it's one of those things where you've got a whole big company that's focused on the transition from GP into BC and the path around it, which means there's a community. And once again, I think that's really important. I think you could argue, to your point in this question, that you could look at any solution to do that conversion. But once again, you can't just look at it from a technology perspective. What other customers have made that leap? What are their pain points that they faced as they went through it? Because those might be the same pain points that you're going to have. And how do we tackle those? So once again, I think that there's more momentum around that community and that transition that makes it easier, where there's more tooling and understanding on what those common shifts are going to be to really help you hit the ground running then with BC, or even theoretically finance and operations, depending upon what your scale is in your organization. So once again, I think we look at it more objectively to say, hey, it's not just the technology, it's the people and the technology along with the processes that really drive that answer.
All right, anything to add to that, Deborah, Nikki?
Totally agree with that. Absolutely.
Totally agree with. Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry, Dan. I was just going to say that it just makes me think of a big integrated kind of ecosystem that supports that technology as well. So it's a little bit like you've heard all day today. It's security, it's identity and access, and it's having tools that kind of collaborate together to get you where you need to be.
And reach out to us for any questions because we can help you with that and those decisions.